All righty, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Pat Seaman with Seaman Retirement Planning. Today, we're going to talk about Social Security, one of my favorite topics. We'll talk about things like how do you qualify, how are your benefits determined, what are spousal benefits, and how do they work, and are there strategies to get more out of your Social Security? And really, another important question, probably one of my favorite topics, is how it gets taxed and why that's really so important when you're working on a retirement plan. I'm here today with my guest, Hamilton Morales. He's my kind of go-to expert for everything Social Security. He's out of Charlotte, North Carolina, works for Financial Independence Group. Hamilton, I'm so glad to have you here today.
Good to be here.
First and foremost, my question that's really been burning inside of me is, have you ever been on Broadway?
No, I haven't. And I know what the next question is. It has to do with the Broadway play, and I'm still waiting on my royalties. I haven't gotten them yet.
That's great. Seriously, though, I would first kind of start off and talk a little bit about your background, kind of your credentials. So kind of lead into
Sure.
the questions we have.
Sure. So I've been in the financial industry since November of 2001, and I've been specifically doing the Social Security side of things for the last 10 years. And so I actually got my education from a couple of gentlemen up in Cincinnati, Ohio. One of the gentlemen actually worked for the Social Security Administration for 35 years, and this is what they do. They teach financial advisors, attorneys, CPAs, people that are going to be working with individuals that have questions about Social Security. And then I actually taught their class for a while and don't do that anymore. Now what I do is things for advisors like yourself, where I go across the country. I do seminars, I do webinars, radio shows, podcasts, whatever I need to do to try to get the word out as it relates to Social Security.
I know you joined us back in May. You came to Ohio
Hmm.
for us, talked to our clients. That was such a great presentation. We really appreciated it. But kind of first start off, kind of keep the ball rolling here. I'd like to talk a little bit about kind of the Social Security basics. How do you qualify? How is your
Hmm.
benefit calculated? When can you start it? You might go over some of those awkward terms like full retirement age, full retirement benefit, delayed retirement credit, COLAs, WEPs, GP. I mean, there's a whole list of them, but maybe you could
Yeah.
start, maybe take about 30 seconds. No, I'll give you more than that, maybe
Oof.
5 minutes or so, and just talk a little bit about basics so we're all kind of on the same page.
Certainly. So there's difference between qualifying for Social Security and then how they calculate your benefit. So in order to qualify for Social Security benefits, the first thing you got to do is work. I know that sounds kind of funny, but who knows what it's going to look like in the future. But as of right now, you have to work. But the second most important thing you have to do is you have to pay into the system. And as maybe the people that are watching this know, that there are some people in the state of Ohio that do not pay into Social Security. They do work, but they don't pay into the benefit. So therefore, they can't qualify for those benefits. And so they look at it per quarter. So you earn a credit per quarter you pay into Social Security. So you get 4 credits per year, and you need at least 40 credits to qualify. Now, like I said before, that has nothing to do with how they actually calculate your benefit. What they do as it relates to calculating your benefit is they take your highest 35 years of earnings and they adjust those for inflation through age 59. Now, that doesn't mean that if you continue to work past 59, 60, 61, 62, so on and so forth, they actually still use those earnings if they're part of your highest 35 years. They just don't adjust them for inflation. So highest 35 years, adjusted for inflation through age 59. They add all those together and they divide by 420. 420 is the amount of months in 35 years. And what they want to get is they want to get a monthly amount. So once they divide it by 420, that gives you what's called your AMI, your average indexed monthly earnings. And what they do with that AMI is they run that through what's called bend points, BEND, and there's 3 bend points. And once they take that and run it through those bend points, I'm not going to go into detail because I don't have the time to, But once they run those through the bin points, that actually gives you your full retirement age benefit amount. So as you can see, that can change on an annual basis, especially for somebody like myself that may or may not have 35 years of earnings. So what they do in your statement is they're going to assume you're going to continue to work making the same amount of money, and that's how they come out with that calculation. So every year it's going to
So,
change a little bit.
so if they're estimating your Social Security, let's say you go out and you're 55 years old and you say, okay, I want to see what my Social Security is going to be at my full retirement age, assuming it would be 67. When they're estimating that, they're looking at the highest 35 years earnings, but are they also including what they think you're going to earn until you're
Mhm.
67?
Yeah, absolutely. They're making assumptions that you're going to continue earning the same amount of money that you did the previous year, and they do that calculation. They're also calculating it based off of the bin points as of that year. Well, bin
Right.
points can change every year, and they don't lock in for an individual until the year that individual turns 62. So once they turn 62, whatever the bin point is for that year, that will lock in for that individual moving forward. So I think you've probably, most people have heard this, the closer you get to full retirement age, the more accurate that number is.
Right. Right.
And there's several reasons for that.
I think a real interesting subtlety here is when people are beginning to look at this and say, hey, when am I going to retire? And they're starting to look at that Social Security number,
Hmm.
they
Hmm.
might be misled. So if they think they're going to retire at 50, it's going to be a lot different than if they actually do retire at 67. And so as they're looking at that, they have to recognize that when they're looking at that 35 years, chances are the first 10 years of their career, they were making very
Real
little
low.
money. And then, you really don't start making your money until you're probably late 30s or even into your 40s. So the longer you work, the later you work into life, I think the chances are you're going to have, of those 35 years, you're going to have a lot higher average earnings going into that
Usually,
calculation.
yeah, usually that's the way it works. It's not 100% that way, but by and large, most people, that's kind of how it works, is that your highest 35 years is typically your last 35 years of earnings, is usually how that works, unless you're doing some part-time stuff once you get into your late 60s. But typically that's how it works.
So cost of living adjustments, COLAs.
Hmm.
Maybe give a
Hmm.
quick explanation of how that works.
Yeah, so in fact, that one should be coming out here pretty soon for 2025. And so they look at and you caught me on this one. Now my mind just went blank. They look at the um
I know they were expecting it to be about 2.5%,
yeah, I'm trying to think of the what they actually look at to determine that.
some
It's
kind of version of
urban,
CPI
yeah,
though, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
for urban wage earners, which is interesting, by the way, because urban wage earners is not the same as people who have retired, right?
Right.
So why are they using that to do that calculation? Doesn't make any sense because they don't have the same cost, the same things that they're purchasing that a retiree
Are
is having
retirees
doing.
CPI, their cost of living, do you think it's higher or lower than
Well,
the
it's
urban?
different though. It's different because when you're talking about retirees, you sometimes you're dealing with more medical expenses, higher
Right.
medical expenses,
Go up
things of
faster.
that nature, right? And that's not factored into the urban wage earners one. So, but they do that every year. They look at what it was at the beginning of the year and they look at it at the end and they do a calculation based off of that. And that's where they determine what the cost of living adjustment is going to be. So I know people would look at that and say, oh, the higher the cost of living adjustment, the better it is. Well, that's actually not true. Because if you think about it, think about what it was last year. Last year was like 8.7%. That's pretty high. Well, why was it 8.7%? It's because inflation was so high last year. So I would much rather have it at 0 to 1% because that means that overall inflation is low. So it's kind of a catch 22.
Right.
on that. Now, this year, they are talking about it. We don't know exactly what it's going to be, but they are talking 2.5, 2.7%, somewhere right around in there is what we're anticipating. That should be coming out probably in the next week or so.
Yeah. So moving on, another question, I get, and I hear a lot about is I have clients that either they worked as a teacher or their spouse worked as a teacher.
Hmm.
And there's a little caveat around your Social Security benefits called the windfall elimination
Yes.
provision, which most
Yes,
people have never heard of that term unless they're a teacher. And
that's exactly right.
unfortunately, in Ohio, this is a big problem and a real sore spot for a lot of people. Maybe you could expound on what that is.
Certainly. Well, Congress is looking to do away with it. Whether that happens or not, we'll see. But basically, it really depends on what you did prior to teaching. We'll use teaching in this, but basically, as a public employee, Ohio has the largest percentage of people who are in public jobs that don't pay into Social Security as it
Did
relates
not
to the
know
whole
that.
country. Yes, Ohio has the largest percentage. So it depends on what you did before that. So maybe you worked 10 years in a private sector job and you got your 40 credits. And then you went into teaching after that. And so now you got your 40 credits, so you qualify for Social Security, but now you're working as a teacher, you're not paying into Social Security. So you're going to fall underneath the WEP, or the windfall elimination provision. And basically what that says is we're going to allow you to get your Social Security benefits, but they're going to be reduced because you're also receiving a pension and you were not paying into Social Security all those years of working for that pension.
Right.
And so, depending on how many years of substantial earnings you paid into Social Security will dictate how big of a reduction that Social Security benefit is going to be. Now, the other piece of that puzzle that a lot of people don't realize is what I call WEP's evil twin, and that's called GPO, or government pension offset. And that has to do with the same person, but as it relates to their ability to get spousal and or widow's benefits. And it's a different calculation. But so you've got two pieces of that puzzle there. You've got the WEP that has to do with their own Social Security benefits being reduced. And then you've got GPO, government pension offset, whether or not you're going to get spousal or widow's benefits. So you've got two pieces of the puzzle. Now, WEP doesn't come into play if you've got a person that went straight from college into working as a teacher and has basically never gotten their 40 credits into Social Security. WEP doesn't come into play because there's no Social Security. You only have to deal with GPO at that point in time.
But to me, this I think is the crux of this is, let's say I have a couple.
Mm-hmm.
One of them, worked as a teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and the other one worked in, the private sector and paid into Social Security. And let's say they have a
Right.
$3,000 benefit, and the spouse with the pension from STRS is getting $3,000, and
Mm-hmm.
he'd say the one that's getting Social Security passes away.
Mm-hmm.
What happens to that Social Security benefit? Because under normal
Yeah.
circumstances, they would continue to get
Right.
they'd get that $3,000.
They step up into that benefit. So what they do in this is it's a very simple calculation. You take your gross monthly pension and you multiply it by 0.667. So what we want is 2/3. That's what we're looking for. So you take that 2/3 pension and you subtract it from the widow's benefit. So if the widow's benefit is 3,000,
Right.
the pension is 3,000, 2/3 of that pension would be 2,000, right? Did I do that
Yes.
math correctly?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're a math guy, right? So you should know
Yeah.
that. So you take the 2,000, you subtract it from the 3,000 widow's benefit. The difference is 1,000. The 1,000 is now the widow's benefit. That's all you're going to get. It's the 1,000 plus your pension.
All right. I don't want to spend too much time on that. The next topic was, I think a lot of people have a question on, is to do with spousal benefits and how they work.
Yeah. Yeah. That is by far the biggest question I get is spousal benefits. So I'll try to keep it as brief as I can, but it can get a little complicated. So first and foremost, there's two rules that come into spousal benefits. Number one, you have to turn on your Social Security benefits. Doesn't make any difference what age you are when you turn it on, but you have to turn it on. You don't have to be first, but it has to be turned on. The second piece of that puzzle is your spouse must turn on their benefit. Again, doesn't have to be first, doesn't make any difference what age they are. It just has to be turned on. Now, once both benefits have been turned on, Social Security is going to look at your full retirement age benefit amount, not the amount you're getting, because you might turn it on at 62, you might turn it on at 70. It doesn't matter. It's always calculated off of full retirement age benefit amount. So they're going to look at your full retirement age benefit amount, and they're going to compare it to half of your spouse's full retirement age benefit amount. Again, it doesn't make any difference what age they turn theirs on. It's always based off of full retirement age benefit amount. So your full amount compared to half of their full amount. If your full retirement age benefit amount is greater than your spouse's half, you do not qualify for spousal benefits. It's that simple. Now, if your full retirement age benefit amount is less than your spouse's half, then you qualify, and they take those two numbers and they subtract them. And that difference is the spousal benefit. And that amount will get added onto what you're already receiving with your own benefit. So I know it's a little complicated. So the best way to look at it is this. You could be eligible for up to 50% of your spouse's full retirement age benefit amount. So could be eligible. There's a potential you couldn't be for up to 50%. Well, that means it could be less. Yes, if you turn your benefit on early, when they do the calculation, it could end up being less. And it's always based off of full retirement age benefit amount. So that's what you need to know as it relates to going in there. And when you're dealing with divorcees, it's identical. The only difference is at the very beginning, rule number one, you have to turn your benefit on. That's still the same. But rule number two is different for divorcees. They're not required to turn theirs on. They only have to reach age 62. So if your ex-spouse is 62 or older, even though they have not turned theirs on, as long as you got yours turned on, that calculation will then be calculated and you could get spousal benefits.
That could be a bit of a can of worms. I don't think we want to go into with
That's the reason why they do it that way.
right. It's complicated, but
Yes,
to
it
reiterate,
is.
it's if, let's say, one spouse has a $3,000 full retirement benefit and the other one has 1,000, then the spouse with 1,000, her spousal benefit would basically be bumped up to half of the 3,000, which would be 1,500.
Assuming she turns hers on at full retirement
Right.
age or
That's yes.
older,
Yep.
she would get a total of 1,500. That'd be 1,000 from her own benefit, and then the 500 spousal portion added together gives her 15, which equals half of his full retirement age benefit amount.
All right. Another question I have is should someone start Social Security if they're still working?
Well, that depends on how old they are. So if they're under full retirement age and they're still working, I would recommend in most cases the answer would be no, do not turn it on. And the reason why is because you have what's called the earnings test. And so the earnings test says that if you earn a certain amount of money, then they could start withholding some of your Social Security benefits. So currently, the exemption amount is $22,320. So that means that you could earn, and this is gross wages, by the way, you can earn up to $22,320, no problem. However, for every $2 you go above that in your earnings, they will withhold $1 of your Social Security benefit. So it really comes down to how much you're actually making. Now,
But
if
wait,
you're, go
when you
ahead.
say they withhold it, do they really withhold it, or is it something they do,
Yeah.
after the fact?
So that depends on the individual. Now, a lot of people will come in and say, oh, I just won't say anything to Social Security. They'll never know.
Right.
Okay. First of all, Social Security is a government entity. They're going to find out. Okay. It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
So if you tell them up front, then they will withhold, they will do a calculation and say, okay, based off of your gross earnings that you told us you're going to earn for this year, we need to withhold X number of dollars. And so they'll do that every month until they get to the point where they've hit that max, and then you'll start getting your Social Security deposits. If you decide, oh, I'm going to hold off and I'm not going to say anything, then the next year they're going to come back and say, hey, you didn't tell us you had these earnings. We see that you did. Now, not only are we going to withhold for the previous year, but we're also going to withhold for this year. So you may not get any Social Security benefits for that year, depending on how that looks. So what I tell people is you really need to sit down with somebody that understands how this works. Let's do the calculation and let's make sure it makes sense for you to do that. Now, once you hit full retirement age, you can work as much as you want. It's not going, there is no earnings test once you hit full retirement age. Oh, and just real quick, and that applies for any Social Security benefits. So spousal benefit, your own benefit,
Sure.
or widow's benefit. If you take any of those early and you continue to work, you will be subject to the earnings test.
So can you talk a little bit how Social Security is taxed and kind of go over another term we call provisional income?
Yeah, provisional income. So everything is based off of provisional income, not taxable income, even though most cases they're one and the same. So provisional income is basically pensions, um, any withdrawals from retirement accounts like 401ks, IRAs, any interest off of what we call interest-bearing accounts. Even though you don't use that interest, in a lot of them, you get a 1099, therefore that counts. Rental income, work income, and here's the big one. A lot of people don't realize interest off of municipal bonds. Even though municipal bonds are income tax free, the interest goes into provisional income to see if you go over the thresholds. And then last but not least, and the biggest one that people don't realize is they do take half of your Social Security benefits and they add that to the pot. So they add all those together. And if you go over certain thresholds, then anywhere between 50% to 85% of your Social Security benefits will be taxable. In other words, that amount will get moved over to the taxable column of your taxes, and you'll have to pay taxes on that money based off of whatever your tax bracket is
But
for
if you
that
are
year.
below a certain threshold, you may not
You
pay
don't.
any taxes on Social Security.
That's correct. The problem is very few people are, especially in your state, because you've got so many people that actually earn pensions, and those pensions count. And you're talking about very low. So let me just give you a real quick illustration. If you have a married couple, and as a married couple, their provisional income is over 44,000. That's not very much. Over 44,000, that means 85% of their Social Security benefits will be taxable based off of whatever tax bracket they're at for that year. So it doesn't take much to get over those thresholds.
I think when we look at this, it's an opportunity to try to reduce taxes. And
Hmm.
part of what we look at is we look at, well, what are your sources of income going to be in retirement? And they're
Right.
typically it could be a pension, it could be
Hmm.
from an IRA. Then
Hmm.
there's interest, dividends, maybe some capital gains. Those are the typical big ticket items. So we looked at
Yes.
what we use. We look to do what we call shifting strategies, which are
Hmm.
ways to move monies from IRAs to Roths, from taxable buckets to tax-free buckets. It's
Yes.
way beyond what we want to cover today, but we found there are ways to kind of reduce that
Hmm.
long-term, like I guess we call long-term tax liability. But they're very specific strategies we try to.
What I ask people is you got to pay taxes on that money anyway. It's going to happen. Do you want to pay taxes when you want to pay the tax? Or do you want to pay taxes when Uncle Sam says you have to pay it? And what I
And I
mean
think
by that,
a big question there then is what is Uncle Sam going to be charging,
when that
not
time
charging is
comes.
not the right word. What are the taxes going to look like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, which is the
Right.
perfect segue to my next question, which is, we look at our country, we have a $35 trillion debt. Social Security is underfunded, and the Social Security Trust Fund is expected, I think, to run out in like 2033. And I kind of want to see, well, what do you think is actually going to
Yeah.
happen? And also, if someone is, say, older than 55, should they be worried that their Social Security is going to be there?
Yeah. So the new report came out back in May, and it's actually 2035 now, believe it or not. And basically, what they say is if changes are not made, there'll be enough money coming in from tax dollars because all the trust fund money is going to be gone. So there'll be enough money coming in from taxes to pay roughly 83 cents on the dollar. So my personal opinion, which is worth about as much as you're willing to pay for it, that's not going to happen. It just won't. The question is when are they going to make the changes? When are they going to make the tough decisions to make the changes to make sure that that Social Security Disability, Medicare, Medicaid are all going to be funded? When are they going to make those decisions? It's going to happen. It's just a matter of how long are they going to continue to kick the can down the road? Because this is not new. This has been going on for decades, decades and decades and decades. But it's political suicide. Eventually, they're going to have to make that decision. I do believe that our generation, those born after 1960, are going to get the brunt of it. Whatever it is, we're going to get the brunt of it. It'll still be there. It will look different. Just don't know how different it's going to look.
Now, I know there are a lot of ways to take advantage of the rules of Social Security, a lot of strategies you can apply, whether it's to taxes or taking advantage. I don't think something we really didn't talk about was the fact that the longer you wait to start Social Security, you get those delayed retirement credits, which means Social Security, gets higher and higher the longer you wait. And a
Right.
lot of people have a question regarding, well, how soon, when should I start taking that benefit? Does it really pay to wait till I'm 70, if they even can, because everybody's circumstances is different. Do you have an opinion on that?
I do. Everybody's situation is different, and anybody that puts people in a box and says everybody should take it at 70, everybody should take it at 62, everybody should take it at full retirement age, you just need to turn around and walk away from them, because everybody's situation is different. You have to look at it in the lens of an income plan. And sure, we would love to wait till 70, but is that beneficial for you in your situation in retirement and what you want to do in retirement? Now, we always start our planning by taking the higher of the two benefits and wanting to wait till 70 for that one. Now, the reason why we do that is because not only does it benefit that person, but if that person predeceases the other spouse, well, the other spouse gets to step up to that higher benefit. So it works for two lifetimes. So that one we always start at age 70, but that doesn't mean that we get to keep it there. Again, it depends on their situation and what does that look like long term for them? What do they want to do today? What type of income do they have coming in? When are they planning on stopping work? I mean, there's just so many factors go into that. You can't put everybody in box and say, oh, you should just take it at 70. That's the best for everybody. That's not the case.
Well, I can't thank you enough for joining me today, but I think it's the gods of webinars say we've gone way over our
Wait,
time limit.
for sure.
But I know you've been such a great help to our clients, to me, to understand Social Security, to help our clients really get the most out of Social Security. But if if anybody has any questions, would like to set up a time to meet with myself, or we can even bring you in on a call.
Yes.
We could certainly help you out. But we hope this webinar was helpful, and we just want to thank everyone for joining us and taking the time to be with us today. And this pretty much concludes the webinar. Thank you very much.